I'm John Batchelor. This is the John Batchelor Show. Major news in Afghanistan. A major VBIED attack, many casualties, and I go right now to Bill Roggio of the Foundation for the Defense of Democracies. And he keeps the Long War Journal along with his colleague, Tom Joscelyn, who will join us momentarily to speak of Syria. This is of war fighting on a vast scale, and Afghanistan has been very much not at the head of the news these last weeks, not because there isn't violence, but because there's been trouble everywhere. But now this car bomb attack, said to be timed with perhaps members of the government passing through the airport. Bill, a very good evening to you. What do we know about the attack? Who claimed credit for it? And what is the tactical significance of this strike? Good evening to you.
Yes, and the strike at the airport, it's really one of four major attacks in the Afghan capital in the past 4 days. It really started with this little mini onslaught started Friday. The Taliban first attacked a police academy and killed 20 policemen. A suicide bomber infiltrated in a uniform. He may have actually been a recruit. We don't know. Then the Taliban launched a suicide assault against a Special Forces base, a U.S. Special Forces base in the capital, and killed a Green Beret as well as 8 or 9 Afghan contractors. Then the next day there was a suicide bombing in a civilian neighborhood. I suspect that was a premature detonation given where it happened and when it happened in the middle of the night. And then today they launched a suicide attack at what they said was a NATO convoy outside the capital. So all of the attacks, Taliban, what they're trying to do is destabilize the Afghan government and meet the objectives of its Azam offensive. It's the name of its spring offensive. And they said they're going to attack the government. They're going to attack the NATO forces, coalition forces, the so-called invaders or the occupiers, infidels, whichever you choose to pick from their propaganda. So they want to show, the Taliban want to show they're still capable of striking in the capital as well as carrying out its offensive in the provinces, which it's doing quite effectively these days, taking over districts recently in Helmand province and in Kunduz province in the north. So, and also there's another, I think, an element of this as well. With the death of Mullah Omar and the appointment of a new leader, I think Mullah Mansour wants to show it's going to be business as usual, and he's just as committed to fighting the Afghan government and fighting and opposing NATO forces, waging jihad, just as much as Mullah Omar has been over the past 14 years.
All right, a series of complex attacks in Afghanistan launched after the confirmation of Mullah Omar's death. We have reason to believe he's been dead for some time. This is new leadership now coming out to launch these attacks. We'll touch on Pakistan in a moment and what part it is playing in the attacks in Afghanistan. We go now to the al-Nusra Front. This is Syrian civil war, creating millions of refugees, but the conflict now involves several levels, including state players. Tom Joscelyn is here to report to us on this proposed buffer zone and what it means that the Turkish forces are getting involved on the front lines, not only against the Kurds, but also on the Aleppo front. Tom, a very good evening to you. Al-Nusra, your reporting, is hesitating. Al-Nusra is associated with al-Qaeda. How do they regard this buffer zone?
Yeah, the al-Nusra Front is a direct extension of al-Qaeda. It answers to al-Qaeda senior leadership, and in fact, senior al-Qaeda leaders are embedded throughout al-Nusra's ranks to guide the organization. So it's just straight up al-Qaeda. And what they've decided here is that because Turkey has decided to side in some ways with the U.S.-led coalition, in particular by proposing this buffer zone in northern Syria and also allowing the U.S. to launch airstrikes from Turkish air bases, U.S. air bases in Turkey, one in particular, that al-Qaeda is basically going to draw back or fall back from its positions in the northern Aleppo province and turn over its territory to other friendly groups that it trusts in that case. Basically, they're saying we don't want to take part in any initiative that's at all connected to the U.S.-led coalition.
A puzzle for me here. The U.S. coalition, Al-Qaeda is admitting that they were already participating, right? Tom, we've talked about that before. These cutout groups that were receiving assistance or participating in the offensive as so-called Free Syrian Army, they were Al-Qaeda. So al-Nusra has changed its mind, or why? Why now and not before?
Well, I think it's a little more complicated than that. Basically, what they were doing was they were benefiting from whatever Western assistance was flowing to these groups in the fight against the Assad regime. And in this case, the way al-Nusra Front looks at it, rightfully so, these airstrikes could easily be used to target them in the northern Aleppo province. So this is something that they have to very much worry about, because the U.S. has been hitting on many fewer occasions, much fewer occasions than the Islamic State. The U.S.-led coalition has been going after al-Nusra Front leaders, al-Qaeda leaders in northern Syria. So this is a very practical matter for them. But by the same token, they can take advantage of this. And part of al-Qaeda's strategy here, which is very diabolical and I don't think gets enough credit, is that basically they have front organizations, what you're alluding to, John, that basically play the game, that take advantage of whatever the global geopolitical actors are doing in the region. So they're turning over territory to friendly rebel groups, but that could include, for example, a group called Ahrar al-Sham, which has senior al-Qaeda leaders embedded its ranks and is deeply allied with al-Qaeda at the very minimum. So this is a very complex game that's going on here. Basically, al-Nusra doesn't want to openly say that they're taking part in this or that they want to take part in it. They don't want its fighters targeted in northern Aleppo province. But by the same token, they probably have enough chips in the game to take advantage of it.
Does al-Nusra still count on Turkey to allow free passage for its recruits to flow into northern Syria?
They've certainly done that over the last several years, of course, last couple of years. We believe they're still doing that. The Treasury and State Departments have routinely recognized the fact that Turkey allows safe passage for al-Qaeda operatives to shuttle cash and fighters through Turkish soil into Syria, to the al-Nusra Front. So it's certainly likely that that's still going on today, although we don't have any current evidence, as of this week or this month. Quickly,
Bill, back to Afghanistan. You note in your report that the Afghanistan government is accusing Pakistan of, in some way, collaborating with this range of attacks. Is that correct?
Yeah, that's right. Both President Ghani and Abdullah, who's the chief executive, it's they have a joint power sharing in the country. Both of them have spoken out and said that Pakistan essentially is responsible. I believe it was Abdullah. Abdullah had said that, on one hand, Pakistan says it sponsors talks, and on the other hand, they allow the Taliban or encourage the Taliban to conduct attacks against the Afghan government inside the capital. And what would Pakistan do if this was if the tables were turned? So I mean, it's a common refrain from Afghan officials to blame the Pakistani government and military when things go bad. But the thing is, it's not just really blame; it's true. The Taliban, its top council, the Quetta Shura, as well as all of its military commands, its regional commands, its top leaders, they're all based in Pakistan. They have close links to the ISI. The ISI said to direct some Taliban units or provide direct assistance. Taliban training camps are in Pakistan. This is no secret at this point in time. I mean, if Pakistan can harbor Osama bin Laden, it's no stretch to think that the group that it helped found, the Taliban, is directly operating on its soil and is still part of what Pakistan considers to be strategic depth.
Tom Joscelyn and Bill Roggio, the Foundation for the Defense of Democracies, reporting on two battle theaters. One in Afghanistan, where the Kabul government is accusing Pakistan of collaborating with these multiple attacks, and the other in Syria, where al-Qaeda, which is represented in the Syrian conflict as al-Nusra Front, is pulling back because of betrayal, of deception by the Turkish government. You notice we're not mentioning Assad in all this, because what's happened in the region, in Syria, is that Syria as a state has failed. There is no Syrian state. There are warlords and there are conflicting battle zones. Right now we're talking about the Aleppo's battle zone. And when we come back, I'm going to ask Tom and Bill to fill in some details. One that Tom's going to take us to in the Syrian civil war is Jaish al-Fatah. Jaish al-Fatah is part of the matrix of jihadists in the region. We're not even mentioning ISIS at this point. These are the subsets that have been created by the failure of Syria and also the inability of the powers to intervene and stop the crisis. I'm John Batchelor with Tom Joscelyn and Bill Roggio, the Foundation for the Defense of Democracies. I'm John Batchelor, War Fighting. My colleagues Tom Joscelyn and Bill Roggio of the Foundation for the Defense of Democracy's Long War Journal. We're talking about battle theaters, widely separated battle theaters, Afghanistan and Syria. And now we go into the deceptions that Al-Qaeda or its al-Nusra Front are engaging in order to, at the same time, defeat the Turkish-American interference in northern Syria and also push back against the sensational success that ISIS has had recruiting foreign fighters in eastern Syria. Right now we're looking at Syria. It's collapsed as a state, but the former Syria has a northwestern component, that's Aleppo province, Idlib province, that's to the west of Damascus, and everything in between Damascus and those two provinces is in play. Al-Nusra Front, because it's completely identified with Al-Qaeda, what the Obama administration has called the Khorasan Group. This is Al-Qaeda. This is pure kill America. This group understands that it needs to compete as recruiting. So it has created or rebranded itself or created a subset called the Army of Conquest, Jaish al-Fatah. Tom, Jaish al-Fatah, right now, is it war fighting or is it growing? If this was a corporation, what stage is it in?
I would say it's a quickly growing corporation, basically, or fast growing. What you have is Jaish al-Fatah is this coalition that includes the al-Nusra Front, that is Al-Qaeda, and its closest allies in Syria. And it's part of these constant rebranding exercises that Al-Qaeda goes through in order to try and achieve the maximum amount of support it can get from Gulf donors and from others throughout the region. And basically, if you think about it this way, if you were to go to somebody throughout the Gulf or throughout the region, throughout the greater Middle East, and you say, I'm going to support Al-Qaeda in Syria, well, that's one thing that may raise some eyebrows even to this day. But however, if you're saying, well, I'm going to support Jaish al-Fatah, this army of conquest is defeating Assad's forces, well, that's a little bit of a different sell. And that's the way this works, that basically, even though Al-Qaeda is deeply embedded and leading this coalition, and its closest allies are joined at the hip with Al-Qaeda inside this coalition, it still provides a sort of a rebranding or new brand for them to market abroad.
So when al-Nusra Front says that it's pulling back from the border against Turkey, does that mean that the Army of Conquest, Jaish al-Fatah, is pulling back as well? And when Jaish al-Fatah is in the field, is it recognized as al-Qaeda? Does the U.S. or does Turkey target it as al-Qaeda?
Turkey doesn't. It's known. I mean, I think if you ask U.S. intelligence officials, they would know that al-Qaeda is, of course, playing a very prominent role in leading the coalition. I think there are probably different assessments to how much Al-Qaeda is leading the coalition. I think we think at the Long War Journal they're playing, the number one role, basically. Because the clever part of Al-Qaeda's strategy, see, you hit right on it, is that when they fall back in the northern Aleppo province from the border with Turkey, who's going to fill in their positions but groups they trust? And they're branded differently, like Arar al-Sham, for example, which we've established was actually co-founded and led by senior Al-Qaeda operatives. And this is something that Al-Qaeda has long considered one of its main priorities inside Syria to support, even dispatching senior personnel from South Asia to Syria to help lead Arar al-Sham. And this is a group, so even though it's branded differently and doesn't explicitly call itself Al-Qaeda, it has all the attributes you would look for in an Al-Qaeda group. Now, remember, John, you go back to Osama bin Laden's files, things that were recovered in that compound in Abbottabad when he was killed. And we know that Al-Qaeda plays this game because you can see it in Osama bin Laden's own writings. You can see him saying to groups around the world, why not hide your affiliation with Al-Qaeda, because you can actually achieve greater success if you don't openly market yourself as such. This is because of the U.S.-led war on terror, as it used to be called. And so this is a deliberate strategy they use to inculcate their radical ideology in populations, spread support for the Salafi jihadist ideology, and also try and deflect attention from their overall plan for the region, which I think is disturbingly still growing strong.
How does this do against ISIS? Are they having success recruiting where ISIS was recruiting?
Well, ISIS, of course, has gotten a lot of the foreign fighters who have come to Syria to fight. It's tough to say, what their market share is overall. I think you hear some commentators almost pretend like ISIS has got 100% of the foreign fighters who have come to Syria. And that's just not true. In fact, the Jaish al-Fatah, the groups that compose or make up Jaish al-Fatah, what they've done is they've actually created a new brand called Al-Mushaharun, which means the immigrants, or basically for fighters who have emigrated or want to emigrate to Syria to wage jihad. And this is sort of their way of marketing and branding themselves to say, hey, if you're a foreign jihadi or somebody who wants to be a foreign jihadi, who wants to come fight here, you'll be welcome with open arms if you come fight for us. And so that's the way of sort of pooling the resources on the foreign fighter side of the market, and also competing with ISIS for jihadists who want to come and blow themselves up and fight against Assad and do other things.
Back to the Afghanistan theater. Bill, you've reported in these last days the U.S. drone strikes active again against the Haqqani network. This is in Pakistan, North Waziristan. Are the Haqqanis associated with these complex attacks in Kabul? Why are we striking them?
Yes, the Haqqanis very likely are part of the attacks in Kabul. Traditionally, the attacks in Kabul have been carried out what the U.S. military used to call the Kabul Attack Network, and that was led by a Haqqani network leader. At least it was 2 years ago. We don't know the status of it now. And it was basically a group that consisted of the Taliban, which the Haqqani network is part of, Al-Qaeda, Lashkar-e-Taiba, movement Taliban in Pakistan. They just basically, jihadist groups pooled their resources in order to conduct attacks like we've seen in Kabul over the last several days. Different elements of this network would, use their strengths to either move equipment in, build the bombs, gather the fighters, etc. And the Haqqani network has historically taken a big role in directing.
So these attacks in North Waziristan, 5 suspected jihadists. We're not pretending any longer we're attacking al-Qaeda with transnational threat against the U.S. We're going in to decap Haqqani network in order to defend Kabul. That's the only way I can read this. We have 30 seconds, Bill.
Yeah, and look, I've reported this for years, that the Obama administration's claim that it's only killing those al-Qaeda leaders and operatives who pose an imminent threat to the U.S. I've reported for years that that's bunk. You could just look at who's been targeted in these attacks and who's been killed and where these attacks have taken place, and they're hitting training camps. Sure, parts of these networks do, but they're, do support the overall global network, but not to the level where you look at these attacks.
Drones.
It's clear.
Drone strikes fighting a local war. That's what it is. And the local war is against the government we claim can stand up on its own against the complex attacks of the Taliban. That's the Afghanistan theater. In the Syrian civil war, another complication.